Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. I'm here with the lovely Terry Meeuwsen, who's going to have all kinds of exciting things this morning.
Absolutely. And exciting things happening tonight, too.
Tonight's the night. All right. You know, I was amused at a breathless story in the New York Times that researchers have discovered that the little critters in your gut are changing your mood. And I wonder who has been talking about that. Well, researchers have confirmed that our stories on Build a Better Gut are indeed true. You don't need Paxil and Zoloft, Olof. Well, what are those? I don't even take them. What are the names of the Paxil?
Antidepressants? Yeah. Are you talking about that take,
what's the name of the one I was thinking about? Is it
Zoloft?
Zoloft, yeah, Zoloft. You don't need them because if your gut flora is right, you're happy and your mood is good. But that story in the New York Times, like, boy, we've got breaking news. Watch the 700 Club for month after month after month, and you will have the breaking news right here.
That's true.
Well, we've
been doing special reports on all of this.
I know.
Trying to inform people.
Well, we've got another one coming up next week that's going to be groundbreaking, and I like to be ahead of the curve on health. But let's talk about the president. He's going to take his case to the American people. We've got David Brody. I want to ask him some questions as his interview is going to be with us. But in the second State of the Union speech, the president is expected to talk about why we need a border wall. And now how he's brought the economy back, which indeed he has.
But the president is facing a tough audience in Washington, as many House Democrats are determined to resist him. Gary Lane brings us the story.
In this State of the Union address, the president is expected to call for political unity and an end to the partisan politics dividing the nation. But the divisive issue of border wall funding may dominate his speech. On CBS Sunday, President Trump suggested he'd shut down the government again if he doesn't get the funding he wants. The president was asked about Nancy Pelosi's offer of $1 billion for border security.
She's costing the country hundreds of billions of dollars because what's happening is when you have a porous border and when you have drugs pouring in and when you have people dying all over the country because of people like Nancy Pelosi who don't want to give proper border security for political reasons, she's doing a terrible disservice to our country.
Trump is unlikely to win that fight with Speaker Pelosi. Much has changed since last year's State of the Union address. Democrats now hold a majority in the House. And when it comes to the president's requested $5.7 billion in border wall funding, he's hit a brick wall of naysayers.
There's not going to be any wall money in the legislation.
But there are signs of cracks in the Democratic wall as some House members break from Pelosi. There's a new willingness to compromise. No wall, but maybe some funding for an enhanced barrier. In return, the president says he'll back a 3-year extension of protection for 700,000 immigrants who came to the country illegally with their parents, the DACA children. The president warns if Democrats refuse to compromise to his satisfaction, he may still call a state of emergency on the southern border. Other issues in tonight's State of the Union: a second summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, trade with China, and America's robust economy. On that, the president will likely speak of his achievements. He's reduced federal taxes and regulations. 304,000 jobs were added to the U.S. economy last month. Unemployment is at a 50-year low, and there are now more jobs available than there are people to fill them. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. There's one thing that I hope and pray the president doesn't even think about, and that's shutting the government down. We can't stand another one of them. That last one cost $11 billion, and we cannot afford it. The people in this country cannot afford it, and they will not tolerate it. And if it's done, I tell you, there'll be a revolution. We can't do that. Well, our chief political analyst, David Brody, is with us now from Washington. David, I understand you're one of the anchors that's going to analyze the president's speech, or what is it, on Fox or on whatever?
Right. So there's going to be a network anchor luncheon today over at the White House. President Trump will be there holding court with some of the network anchors. CBN invited. We're now a staple of that luncheon the last couple of years. So we'll hear more from the president as to what he's going to do tonight. Look, he's going to talk about the economy. This just in, newsflash, even for liberals, the economy's doing really, really well, Pat, as you know. And Gary just mentioned there as well. Stock market up 6,000 over the last couple of years, too. And GDP growth, which was at 1.8% when he started, now up at 3.4% in that last quarter. And so that'll be a big part of it. But the question everybody's going to want to know is how he will treat the wall and the funding. The sense is there's going to be somewhat of an olive branch, but at the same time, some serious talk about, look, we need to come together and figure this thing out.
Don't you think this is sort of an obsession? And the other is so important to the people. I'm not sure America yet feels this importance of that wall. The president's trying to urge that on us, but I don't know that it resonates as much as health care and jobs and money.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Pat. There's a strong sense in this country that folks want the border protected. There's no doubt about it. Also, you know, this president obviously promised the wall. And now it's become, well, what is it going to look like exactly? And I think we are now into semantics. And that's how this thing could potentially end by February 15th, as Democrats and Republicans try to figure out what does a wall really mean. And I think what we're going to end up with, Pat, is some sort of, once again, a semantics argument, but maybe a fence. Remember, Donald Trump at the beginning of all of this wanted a 30-foot wall, concrete wall. Not happening, by the way. Maybe some fencing between 18 feet and 30 feet. I think that's probably the give and take. Maybe 24 feet split the difference. Also, the president wants $5.7 billion, as we know, in this funding. That covers about 215 miles or so of additional fencing, wall, barrier, steel slats, Lego pieces, whatever you want to call it. Bottom line is, that's going to be an interesting position as to whether or not they go lower than that $5.7 billion, maybe split the difference and do $2 or $3 billion.
David, we don't hear a whole lot about this in the news, but there are states now that want to override any limit on abortion whatsoever. You know, the governor of Virginia shocked everybody when he talked about a baby being born and they keep him nice, warm, and comfortable before they decide whether to kill him or not. I mean, this was absolute infanticide, and it shocked people. But apparently there's a move in Congress to pass a federal law that overrides any restrictions on state anti-abortion provisions. You want to talk about that? Is the president going to mention that tonight?
You bet. I don't think he's going to actually mention what I'm about to say, which is the Women's Health Protection Act. It hasn't been officially introduced in Congress this year. It will, though, because it's been introduced every year since 2013. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat, supports it. Basically, it would override all state restrictions on abortion in the third trimester. Well, look, that's what Virginia's pretty much doing, right? I mean, you can have a baby, or a baby's coming down the birth canal, and if a mother says at that point, I don't want the baby can be aborted. So indeed, this is federal legislation that would, in essence, do the exact same thing. And Kamala Harris, running for president, a lot of other folks, Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, they all support it. Matter of fact, they're co-sponsors of it. And so this is going to be clearly a litmus test for Democrat candidates. It may play well with their liberal base, obviously, but look, Pat, in the Gallup poll shows that 13% of Americans, only 13% of Americans, say it's okay to legally abort a baby in the third trimester. Most Americans don't believe that whatsoever.
You know, David, I was so shocked in that debate with Hillary Clinton and the president when Hillary Clinton refused to back off a stand in favor of partial abortion, which means that the baby is partially being born, and yet you can suck his brains out at that time. It's so gruesome and horrible. And yet she said, I am not going to back off of that. Is that the left-wing Democrat position on this other initiative?
100%. There's not even any equivocation with that, Pat. You know, Donald Trump came out strong in that third debate talking about late-term abortion, partial birth abortion, and we have never heard a Republican presidential candidate speak so specifically about the procedure. I remember that like it was yesterday, and now we have Donald Trump on Twitter talking about the Democrats are the party of late-term abortion and open borders and onward and onward. He's going to play this card in 2020. I don't think there's any question about it. Pat, also, let me just say something about the morality here. It's interesting to hear Nancy Pelosi speak about a border wall being immoral, but apparently, because she's okay with partial birth abortion in terms of Planned Parenthood, support for Planned Parenthood, she's clearly okay with babies coming down a birth canal and being aborted at the last moment. So that's not immoral, but a border wall is immoral? I mean, this country and this culture, Pat, is upside down.
You know, it is, David, and it's so shocking. You know, the president made an interesting statement. He doesn't see any of these. He thought Cory Booker said he isn't up to the standard. He can't win an election. Do you think, have the Democrats got anybody that they can run right now that could challenge Trump? You know, it isn't Trump versus the field. It's Trump against somebody. They've got to pick somebody in some position in the 2020 election.
The two people I'm looking at that might have potential are Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar. Let me explain for a moment about Biden. Obviously, we know about Joe Biden. He can attract those blue-collar Democrats that Trump won in 2016. And look, let's be honest, he'll get in the gutter with Trump if he has to. He has no problem doing that. And so I think there's a potential there. Biden has that potential. Amy Klobuchar, you know, if you look at the progressives and you look at their scorecards, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, they all get A ratings from the progressive groups out there. Amy Klobuchar gets a C. She's a little bit less liberal, still liberal, but less liberal. She may be more palatable in the middle because, look, the Democrats have gone far to the left, Pat. It's not just abortion. I mean, you can just go down the list, everything from tax policy. And how about this Green New Deal they're talking about? You know, inside this environmental Green New Deal, basically they want to get rid of half the military funding. That's inside of that. They literally want to cut military funding in half to pay for this green environmental new deal. Look, it could be a bonkers primary for the Democrats, and they've got to be careful not going too far left. It'll set Trump up very nicely.
Well, it looks that way. Well, David, I appreciate it. One last thing. The Democrats, or at least the Southern District of New York, they're opening an inquiry into Trump's election campaign. It looks like to me they'd leave him alone after a while, but they're still going after him. What do you think about that?
Yeah, they're going after him there. And also this week, you know, it's funny, we're talking about the State of the Union, and there's going to be pretty much the speech where it's going to be an attempt, hopefully, to have the country come together. But what's going to happen on Wednesday of this week? More hearings with the Democrats. They're going to talk about the Trump administration's separated family policy there at the border. Michael Cohen is coming in later here in a few days to talk privately to House members, House Democrats. And then, of course, the tax return situation in terms of looking at Trump's tax returns. That's on the table later this week in one of the Democrat committees. So it's not really the state of our union. It's really more the state of our disunion.
David, thank you. Keep it up. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Pat.
David Brody, ladies and gentlemen. Well, you can see our special coverage of the State of the Union on CBN News Channel. Beginning at 8:30 tonight, we'll carry the president's speech and the Democratic response. It'll be live and with appropriate commentary. Well, Terry, David's interesting. It's some interesting stuff.
So glad he's in the front seat there where he can bring us this
he'll be at the luncheon with the anchors.
It's great.